Hello and welcome to Mainstream by SIFTER. It's the games podcast where the SIFTER team have a chat about whatever games they've been checking out recently, from major studio releases to independent games or even micro games. You're listening to Nicholas Kennedy right now, contributing writer to SIFTER, and in what I think is a podcast first, a brave new frontier, if you will, we are welcoming a guest. Chantelle McColl is a Melbourne-based games writer and journalist who has contributed to Byteside, Checkpoint Games, the Explosion Podcast Network, and of course, the recently christened GamesHub. G'day, Chantelle. How are you doing?
I'm going quite well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing just perfectly. It's absolutely wonderful to have you on. So, just to sort of preface our conversation today, I understand you're a little bit of a Metroidvania diehard, which is suitable for today because, you know, we're going to be avoiding killer robots and shooting missiles at doors, and then at the end it'll turn out that we were both girls all along. That's right, it's the most recent entry in the 35-year-old franchise known as Metroid. It's Metroid Dread. Why don't we jump in?
You're listening to Mainstream by SIFTER. Visit us on sifter.com.au.
Soon be entering CGR's atmosphere.
So, Metroid Dread. It's the first console what you plug into the television entry in the Metroid franchise since Other M, all the way back in 2010, which was on the Wii. I guess just to start us off, you know, what's your experience? I know I mentioned you were a kind of Metroidvania diehard. What's your experience with the franchise of Metroid, and also just like Metroidvanias more generally prior to Dread?
Yeah, let me have a little think about this. So, Metroidvanias originally were what got me into games writing, because that genre, what they were doing with revealing worlds and narratives was really unique. And so I've played a lot of modern Metroidvanias, obviously Hollow Knight, Cave Story, Ori in the Blind Forest, Blasphemous, Axiom Verge, the list goes on. you know, and it's hard to be interested in Metroidvanias without knowing of, or at least playing Metroid. You know, the original Metroid was so influential to games in the late 80s with its non-linear structure. So I actually replayed Fusion last week to refresh my mind on the plot and world before jumping back into Dread.
So, for people who haven't ever heard of a Metroid game, possibly, however you've managed that, is you play as a sort of a spacefaring bounty hunter character known as Samus Aran, and she just kind of tools around the universe, you know, hunting people. She's got some kind of nemesis that crop up in a lot of different games. She fights aliens, and she often finds herself deep in sort of, you know, facilities and the depths of planets and all that kind of thing. But basically, the beginning of Dread is actually, I think, dealing with a fair bit of lore, and it's supposed to be the final entry in a series that, you know, obviously starts with Metroid. But as far as mainline kind of narrative entries in the series go, Dread is supposed to be the end, apparently, which is a little bit weird when you consider the ending. But yeah, so do you kind of, but just to sort of not get too spoilery, but do you kind of feel like the story or the lore really matters in these games? Does it matter to you at all?
I think that for Metroid in particular, like as a franchise, the the plot and the lore has always been a backdrop for the exploration and gameplay. But I feel, for me in particular, it really, really elevates your experience if you take the time to understand it. You know, I think in particular for Dread, because throughout your playthrough there is constant callbacks to previous lore, like the Chozos, Samus's DNA, the X parasites, that come up not only in cutscenes but also in the gameplay too. Even as simple as when you kill the X-parasites and their bodies float around in the air for you to absorb, which was originally introduced in Fusion. It's those small little details of lore that Dread incorporates that is really, really impressive. And I think going into it and not knowing any of the lore, I feel like you miss out a little bit.
You mentioned just then that you had been playing Metroid Fusion, which kind of came out almost when the series was sort of in its heyday. Like, it's a pretty celebrated Metroidvania game, or Metroid game more generally. Jumping from Fusion to this and playing them, Fusion to Dread, and playing them so closely together, what was that experience sort of like? How did that feel pairing the two?
um, I I would honestly, I would recommend anyone do that. I got so much out of it because Dread, when Dread starts, it's pretty much like, I don't know, maybe like a week or like the next day since Fusion ends. So it's a direct sequel to when the Fusion ends, and so the lore and the plot just like keeps going, and so you go from, it's weird, you go from this 2003 game that is super 2D, really contrasted in style, um, and the lore is still so vibrant and alive, and then you go to this almost 2D 3D game almost 20 years later, and it picks off exactly where it's left off, even though it looks so different. And I think it's really incredible, and a lot of the same themes are still pulled on in Dread as well, which I think was really powerful. They tried to do a couple things that didn't quite work for me, and some things that worked really well, so yeah.
It's it's so interesting that you point out that these two games, Fusion and then Dread, happen within such a close kind of in-universe time period to each other. Because to me, Dread, I'll just get this out of the way. Like, I really like this game. I think this game is really fun and really good. And there's definitely some critiques you could level at it, just in terms of like the kind of, I don't know, the gamer audience that it's entering into now and what people expect from games currently. But I think it's a tremendously handsome game. I think it's just, it pulls something from the time when Fusion came out into 2021. It takes something from 2003 and brings it into 2021 that is kind of this, I don't know, it's just a video game ass game. Like, it's just, it does not, it just goes for it. And I think it's from and the thing that struck me the most when I first booted up the game was just how no frills the whole thing kind of is. You get the splash screen, Metroid Dread, you hit A, you're immediately presented with a save, the three different saves you could have. And then you're just into it. You get a bit of exposition, you talk to your robot Adam a little bit, and then you're just in the world.
That elevator leads to the depths of an underground facility. Signal quality is nearly low. Remote communication remains difficult. Try to connect to the facility's network.
It's been such a long time since I played a game that was just like, all right, go run around. Like, go start
Yeah.
shooting blocks in the walls. You are just in this map now. Did you have a similar kind of feeling to that? Or maybe coming from Fusion into Dread, did it feel a little bit more natural? Or what was that? What were the opening hours of this game like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was writing notes as soon as I opened up the game, and it started off with that exposition cutscene, and it just brings you up to speed and tells you exactly what Samus is doing, and then you are suddenly on the planet. And I was like, that is exactly how Fusion started. That's exactly how all the other games started. It just brings you back to, I guess, the original make of the games, which is why I think that it's going to be really popular with people that have played the original games or maybe are a bit older, because we're so used to now having a lot of exposition, a very slow opening, a lot of narrative, and with this it was just like, all right, we're going to give you 3 screens of just telling you what's going on, and then you're just going to go. I personally really, really like it, within the context of Metroid, but I feel like if another game was doing that, I probably wouldn't like it as much, because I know they're following a style.
Interesting. This is sort of Metroid's turf.
Yeah,
You can't,
exactly.
you can't just throw someone into this alien world um, without explaining it if you're a different game.
Yeah.
And I guess and that brings us to maybe a more overarching theme of the game is that Metroid Dread. I don't know about you, but Metroid Dread's hard. Like it's a pretty tough game as far as Metroidvanias go. And I mean, I know that games like Hollow Knight and Dead Cells especially. I mean, like that's also like a run based game where you are supposed to die like a bunch. But I found myself not so much dying against mobs and even bosses. Well, there are some rough bosses as well, but I think it's more of like the structural expectations that the game has of players when you go into it that feels very hands off and very sort of, okay, we've told you how to run around, we've told you how to jump and shoot and stand in place and aim and all those kinds of things. Figure it out. Like it's literally, here are your tools. You need to go and figure this out. And just to sort of explain to people, like I'm sure people have seen what this game looks like, but you're in a 2D, mostly 2D, well, it is a 2D environment, 2.5D. You get some lovely depth to a lot of the scenes that you find yourself in. But every place is a room with, a roof, walls, and a floor. And basically you're trying to figure your way through this place by either shooting through, like navigating through doors or finding cracks in blocks in the environment, and you shoot at those with your blaster, or you use the myriad of tools that you sort of collect throughout the game, whether it be like bombs that you can drop while you're in ball form, or I don't know, bigger bombs that you can drop while you're in ball form, or different kinds of missiles and things like that. And they're all basically keys that are essentially unlocking more of the environment for you to make your way through. And for me, the thing that I struggled with the most with this game was not necessarily the moments where it was expecting me to be particularly skillful when it came to jumping around or shooting things or beating a boss or whatever. It's kind of more the understanding of, well, what does this game want me to do now? Like I'm over here in this corner of the map. Does it want me to get on that train? Does it want me to go over here and bomb those blocks and maybe try to get to that spot on the map over there that I know is there but I haven't gone to yet? It was that kind of completely hands-off feeling that you have of like the game just doesn't explain itself to you in those terms, which is kind of part of the appeal in a way, and maybe something that people took from the original games that really spoke to them. Did that kind of come across to you as well? That sort of, I don't know, like it gives you everything that you need, obviously, but it's not then going to put a little shiny dot on the map and be like, go over here, Did you have that similar kind of experience?
Yeah, I think we're getting into my contentious points very early. Because I know, after I've been reading like a few of the reviewers, and I know a lot of people are saying that it's not very guided, that it's very hands off. However, for me, I feel that they found a perfect balance. Because of the way they've kind of structured the map, it means in most cases there really is only one way forward unless you're backtracking for items. And yes, finding the right path can be very difficult. I got lost so many times trying to find a teleporter. It was crazy. But the game like has an illusion that it's like this completely really open world, where in reality it's actually incredibly linear. And I think that illusion in particular is very, very impressive. Um, and I guess that the other half of that, coming from Fusion in particular, the Fusion exploration relies on you finding like whole secret areas that aren't even on the map, like at all. And they can be very frustrating, and a lot of the time it was just random luck that you would find them. But they've really like pared that back a lot in Dread, and so the hidden pathways have mostly been like reduced. And so for me, coming from Fusion to this, the exploration was actually like a lot more satisfying for me, and I was like, oh, this is great. Like I don't have to work as hard. I kind of just have to walk around for a little bit and then I'll find a teleporter. that. I also, in terms of the map mechanics, I really also liked that when you were in an area on the map, it would start flashing. So it would show that there's a hidden upgrade there somewhere. I feel like that took a lot of the guesswork out of the game and made it a lot easier to find your upgrades than just having to wildly walk around this like humongous map and trying to find as many as possible. I think yeah, you're right. Um the map mechanics, I kind of just like they're very progressive and accessible almost for everyone if you want to use them or not.
100%. And I think that maybe the primary thing that most people will run into is maybe an issue when navigating around the world are the Emmys, these sort of um, particularly slinky, sort of horrible things. These robots basically that were sent to the world before you got there, and they were scientific research robots. I believe they're able to identify effectively anything in the world. But what's happened before you got there is they've been reprogrammed. They're now a threat, essentially. They're going to kill you, like, if it's the last thing that they do. And the areas that they're assigned to in the world are very delineated, that if you, in the sense that you can run through a door and the Emmy will not follow you through that door. And when you are heading into an Emmy area, you know it because the door has this kind of cool digital effect on it that kind of makes it really clear that you're going into that thing's turf. And I don't know about these things, Chantelle. I really, I don't know quite what. So Dread, when it was announced with a name like Dread, I mean, ooh, spooky. It's gonna scare you. Like it's a horror. Metroid has always had a thread of horror running through it, and that's kind of what I really love about it. You mentioned, I think, when we were talking before about the was it like Shadow Samus or kind of the X Samus?
Oh, the SAX, yeah.
SAX that follows you through Fusion, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and how that was implemented into the game for some really effective horror moments. But the Emmy robots are way more freeform. They're AI enemies that move through the space, and it's effectively a stealth section for that you can enter in and out of, and you need to head through these areas in order to get to where you need to go. And man, I just hate these things. I just fucking hate them. They were so annoying to deal with, and I think that they were, I don't want to call them a complete failure of kind of what they were supposed to do, because I do think there were some moments where they were chasing me through a space, and I knew that by the skin of my teeth I was kind of gonna get out, but I could still feel the sort of the heart pumping sort of chase sequence. But I just think about the sort of the unpredictability of them didn't actually amount to any kind of meaningful moments. It was just me getting grabbed and killed a lot. I don't know what your experience was like with them.
Yeah, so I have a couple points on the Emmys. The first one is, and we just touched on that with the horror element of the game, is that they really miss the mark with trying to build tension and trying to build horror elements. Because obviously, I remember when I saw them in the trailer, and I was like, "Oh, these are going to be scary. These are going to be really hectic to try and get away from." And I think what really actually let it down was that they were like stuck in this like rigid set area where you knew where they were going to be. And then so you go in there and then you're like, all right, I'm instantly going to put on my cloak and I'm just going to walk for a little bit and then I'm going to try and get out. Like it's very predictable kind of what you have to do. And it takes attention out instead of like, yeah, in Fusion, when the SAX, you hear them and you hear the footsteps and then you just have to blindly run and try and find somewhere to hide, because if they get you, you're just dead instantly. But that was actually genuinely scary. And I see that they attempted to try and do the same thing, but they really missed the mark. The other aspect of that was I felt that there were too many.
There were a lot.
There were a
There's
lot.
like
I think
7
there's
of them.
7, and
I think.
you only verse 6 of them.
Mm.
But there's at least like 10 bosses in the game, right? And then you also have to defeat 6 of these robots. I ended up really not looking forward to killing them. Like, I just much preferred sneaking past them. I almost wish there was only one that was chasing you around like the whole game, um, instead of, I guess, what you ended up having to do, which kind of brings me into my next point of really disliking the 3D scope.
The 3D scope, which is, oh, do you mean when you get the Omega Blaster
Yes.
and you go into that cool over the shoulder aiming down the space
Yes, it was like this
mode?
weird 2.5
Yeah.
thing. I don't know, for some reason I really disliked that.
So just to kind of explain to people what Chantelle is talking about, when each Emmy can be killed, and it can only be killed with a particular power up that you get by navigating through the area and finding this particular room with this like armored brain thing. It's always an armored brain. This is the other thing with the Emmys, is that it's the same experience every time. It's they change it up a little bit near the end by giving some of the Emmys special abilities, like they can stun you or they can freeze you with the freeze ray, which drove me absolutely nuts. But you find this armored brain, you kill the armored brain, and you get this power up gun that you can use to like essentially melt away their armor plating and shoot them in the head and take them out. Because you can't kill them with any other item; you just have to run away. And I think it's kind of, it's obviously the people that design Metroid have looked at the past decade of horror games and been like, people really like it when you can't kill the monster. People really like it when you have to run away. With the Emmys, you kind of, when you enter into their world, you don't know what you're going to get, but at the same time, you kind of know exactly what you're going to get. You are going to accidentally trip its sort of sphere of sensor around it, and then it's going to start moving at you with a clip, and then you've essentially got a couple of seconds to exit the room, or if you can keep at pace, you've only got a couple seconds to get out of the space before it catches you and kills you.
The only time that I was genuinely like like getting a bit scared and dreading actually going into the Emmy section was with the purple Emmy, which was the pretty much the last one that you have to kill. And it did really capitalize on the tension, and I think it's because the area is designed so small and enclosed that you're forced to interact with it. Like, it immediately upon going in, it's going to sense that you're there. And I died a billion times just trying to get past it. And I was like, how am I supposed to do this? Because I'd been going slow and sneakily the whole time. And then I was actually forced to interact with the game in a more like fast-paced way. And that made me feel really tense. And so I feel like that was the one time that I thought the Emmys were actually effective in what they were trying to do for the whole time. But I only felt that in that last part.
Definitely. And it's interesting, in the moments where you're dealing with the Emmys, if anything, the one thing that they do is really bring home the sort of movement and controls of the game, because you're expected to move through their spaces with such sort of precision and speed. But the controls of this game have been a little bit divisive, let's say. But just to kind of give people an idea of, what people are talking about when they complain about the controls in this game, is like you have this thing where you can essentially like plant yourself in place and aim like around, but there are also expectations that you, when in that aiming mode, you can like vary the different things you can fire, and it essentially puts people in a situation where they're like contorting their hands around the controller in order to, and I found myself in moments when the game is expecting me to quickly react to a particular point on an enemy or a particular moment where it wants you to shoot one particular thing, and if you cannot remember the recipe of buttons that you need to be pressing in order to make that happen, it's not going to happen for you.
In terms of the controllers, like, firstly, I suffered horrendous cramping and pain after playing Dread on the Joy-Cons, and I think it was because, like, frequently you have to use the aiming mechanics and missiles on your bumper, and your hands are just sitting in this, like, very crowded position for most of the game. And so when your hands finally release, it's so painful. And I And in terms of what you were saying about if you couldn't remember the specific controls, I felt that particularly in the Golzuna boss fight, which was the underwater boss fight, because you're supposed to use your grapple beam to go up and above the boss, except having to remember to grapple beam, and then
Aim. It's
aim,
like
press the
aim.
Y button.
Don't
Ah!
don't hit right bumper though. Hit right trigger, and that
Yes!
makes it blue, and then it's a beam, and then you'll grab. Yeah,
It was a nightmare. Like, actually, I think that was the most I've died in the boss fight, just because I didn't ever use the grapple beam at all, and so when I was forced to, I was like, oh wait. And in such a fast situation, I was like, wait, how am I supposed to do this?
yeah, completely. No, and just mentioning the boss battles in this game, I think that they are absolutely a highlight. I think that the boss fights in this game are very memorable, but very, very tightly designed and tightly contained, because you have to remember that all of this is happening within, a single room of a map, and in this very sort of archaic world design, which is just showing you a single 2D space. But the amount that they do with boss battles in this game, especially when you can counter bosses in particular ways, and you get these extremely cool sequences where the camera will pull in behind Samus and you can still be firing your weapon though. And I just think that some of that stuff is both very cinematic but extremely satisfying at the same time. And it really is kind of where the games, as much as we've sort of complained about the nature of the controls, it's almost kind of where they shine the most as well, in a way.
They were an absolute highlight. Oh my goodness. I think especially because of the unique aesthetic designs as well. Each boss was so different. And they each have a really interesting set of mechanics too. You actually had to learn what to do. And I love that they were multi-phased as well, because then you get these awesome cutscenes in between that kind of just pull you into this next stage, and it's really immersive. What I might be the only one that thinks this, but I really did not like the QuickTime events, the countering QuickTime events. I think it's because I put all this time and effort into getting through the phase, and then if you miss the counter, you have to do it all again.
That's
And it was so
nightmarish.
frustrating.
It's just, there's your horror. There's the horror element of Dread for
Yeah,
you
you miss
completely.
one X button, and then you have to do that whole part again. You're like,
Yeah.
no!
But just to kind of close this out, Dread is interesting. It's the end of a franchise that took end of at least a narrative arc that Nintendo's been playing with for decades. But it's also, for a lot of people, I think, quite possibly the first Metroid game that they could maybe care about in a way. It's this weird sort of new thing, but it almost feels like it's speaking more to rusted on fans of the series. Do you think it's a good sort of entry point into the series for people?
I'm in two different minds when it comes to recommending people to Metroid Dread. Because in terms of just pretend exploration, I think this is one of the easier entries for Metroid. However, the combat is really difficult, and in terms of lore, you'd get a lot out of playing the previous entries first. What I would probably actually recommend is that people play a few different Metroidvanias first before picking up the Metroid series at all. Familiarize yourself with the exploration and the hidden doors in a way more accessible Metroidvania. Because I feel like if a lot of reviewers are talking about the lack of guidance in Dread being difficult, then you're gonna find all Metroid games really difficult. So maybe an easier Metroidvania might be a better place to start.
Yeah, maybe one that just at least kind of tells you where to go. Because
Yeah,
I feel
exactly.
I feel like what I talked about before with that sort of invisible hand that is kind of ushering you in the right direction. I don't know. Maybe that's just gamer brain. Maybe that's just I've played too many video games and I just kind of have a feeling for it. But yeah. For myself, I'm in complete agreement with you. I think ultimately and you can give final thoughts just after this. Like, I think ultimately, like, this is, like I said at the top, it's an astounding. It is very good. It is a very, very good game. It's extremely satisfying to play. The world is absolutely beautiful. It's hard in a way that usually is just very satisfying, because you are dishing out just as much damage as you are kind of taking. Like Samus is a very cool character to play as, and I just think it's a very good one. If you are a fan, like Chantelle mentioned, of Metroidvanias, and you've played them all, this is going to be like just beautiful. It's like a beautifully aged wine of a Metroidvania to check out. It's like it's up there with the best of them, in my opinion, 100%. Aside from these few things which are sort of archaic issues in a way of like, it's got this historical baggage.
The game is absolutely phenomenal. I think they've balanced out a lot of the problems that were in previous Metroids and have made it a little bit more accessible for newer players. I think the style is going to be really interesting. I wonder if future Metroid games will have this kind of 2.5 3D visual and really like divorce from that really contrasted, vibrant colors of the 2D games. I wonder where that's going to go. But yeah, I think this is the beginning of potentially a new era of how Metroidvania games are made. So I'm really excited. I think Dread did an amazing job.
This is Mainstream.
So this has been Mainstream by Sifter. Thank you so much for joining us. What did you think of Metroid Dread? Do you have a hot take? Give Sifter a follow on all the usual spots at Sifter HQ, or you can join us and discuss your favorite games on the Sifter Discord, where you can share your aforementioned hot takes. Just visit sifter.com.au/discord. That's sifter.com.au/discord. Thank you so much to Brian Fairbanks from Salty Dog Sounds for composing the Mainstream theme music. Chantelle, thank you so much for joining me. This has been an absolute pleasure. Where can listeners get some more of your incisive critical thoughts? Where are you writing at the moment?
Well, you can find my work on Twitter. The links, that is, at CL_McColl. And otherwise, I've got some reviews lined up with Checkpoint Gaming and Explosion Network at the moment. That'll be coming out soon. So, yeah.
Great. And we've got another podcast called Light Map, where we talk to game developers, creatives, and people who are doing cool things in interactive media. So head over to your podcast player and type in Sifter and give us a follow. You can get every episode of Light Map and Mainstream for free. And we've also got a website, so hit it up at sifter.com.au. There are articles, written pieces, videos, and more that you can check out there. And obviously, the best way to support the show is by telling a friend, spreading the good word of our great gaming deeds, if there could ever be such a thing. We've also got merch now. You can check that out at sifter.store. That's just sifter.store. And thank you so much for listening.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.